So similarly, in the other rooms, they're also wrapping up. It's always hard to cut off the discussion when it's getting good and many people want to input. Um, so thank you again, all of you, for your participation in the discussions. And I look forward to hearing the reflections from our breakout room moderators. So let's see, it looks like people are slow to come back. People are coming back from the other room. And in the interest of time, I would like to get started in this session to reflect on these discussions so we can all hear a little bit about what happened in every room, and also have from these 5-minute reflections some richness and depth from the personal take from each of the moderators on the set of issues that they heard during the session. So I would like to first invite the moderator of SDG 4, Ms. Anna Platanova, to share her 5-minute insights from the discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliet. Hello, colleagues. To those who were not in our breakout session, my name is Anna, and I'm the RCO team leader in Georgia. And we've had a good discussion on various aspects of the impact of the pandemic on progress towards quality in the education under SDG 4. Let me take you through some of the elements of this discussion. We've looked at some of the structural challenges in the countries in our region when entering the pandemic, such as, for example, the changing labor markets and the changing demands for skills, which was not sufficiently addressed by equal changes in the education system. Various inequalities in access to and quality of education, and that is not only about the digital divide, but of course all aspects of inequalities, including impact, spatial, gender, disability, and so on. So these persistent structural challenges also exacerbated the negative impact of the pandemic, including under SDG 4. And so many of the broader recommendations, national level, regional recommendations, they're not in fact new. They are the same recommendations as before, and it's a call to include the implementation of these various strategic measures into the recovery package, and to make sure that even in the conditions of fiscal tight fiscal space, that governments still proceed with the necessary structural reforms. So we looked at the broadly negative impact of the pandemic, despite the various measures that the governments took to mitigate that impact. 71% of participants in our poll said that their government took at least some measures in this regard. So the quality of education received by learners in this period worries many. And in particular, we looked at the negative impact of digital divide on hard to reach low-tech or non-tech populations. So poor learners from poor families, those in the informal sector, persons with disabilities, and so various intersectional aspects that contribute to being left behind in the field of education. So with that, of course, many of the new insights and new experiences gained through the pandemic offer ideas for better education systems in the future. with improved curricula, more flexibility in delivering learning, including through remote measures, which could potentially improve access to education. However, so in a way, these challenges can also be looked at as opportunities. But of course, looking at these digital solutions and incorporating them more broadly and more thoughtfully into the education system is, of course, not a silver bullet unless these various structural inequalities are addressed. And so participants spoke on the need to focus not only on improving education systems as such, but the importance of action in other areas, including broader social inclusion, connectivity. And again, some of these measures are long-term. We cannot expect quick results overnight. So inevitably, some of the solutions will need to look in a very targeted way as to how the existing education gap would not be exacerbated further in the recovery process. We looked in particular at how remote learning doesn't account in an appropriate way for socialization needs of learners. How it can have a negative impact on the relations with teachers. So in fact, the whole broad ecosystem, not only of the cognitive needs, but broader emotional, social needs of both learners, teachers, parents, employers, and everybody who is part of this education environment. So I will close here. Thank you all for your contributions, and many thanks to Frank, to Natalia, to Valentin, and also to many other ESCAP colleagues and interpreters for making this breakout session and the summary possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your summary, and I'll go in order of the breakout rooms. So I'd like to ask next Ms. Rushan Jilmanid, the Office of the Resident Coordinator in Uzbekistan, to share on SDG 14.
Sorry, there's some technical issues. Anyways, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you once again to ESCAP and its co-organizers for organizing the sub-regional forum. Before I actually give the feedback from our discussion session, I'd like to thank all those who participated in the session and enriching it with their perspectives. So we tackled SDG 14, Life Below Water. As you know, the sub-region is a little bit unique in terms of trying to tackle life below water. So there were three things, okay, so we started actually our session by trying to tackle what do the representatives from different countries think when they hear about life underwater. And as you can see, it varies from actual life or biodiversity underwater, such as from dolphins, from the sturgeons, from the seals, to fisheries. And also they are thinking about rivers within the region and the different activities related to the use of these different water resources, such as the ones for hydropower, hydroelectricity, and even for transportation of resources such as oil and gas. And also in other parts of the sub-region, there is a good sort of coastal tourism. And I'm sorry, not all of the flags were shown right here, but I tried to put it earlier. But yes, these are the feedback we received from Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan earlier. Sorry, it's just moving like that. So let me just put it all right there. Okay, so from that perspective of how they understand life below water, the group tackled, so what do they think, or how has COVID actually affected this life underwater, and also the different activities that they have identified around the water areas within the subregion. And it actually, from two sides of the spectrum, some are some benefited from COVID-19. The others are, they observe some negative impacts, for example, due to closure restrictions. However, it was reported to us from Turkmenistan side that although there were, due to closure, international tourism declined. However, it boosted local tourism in the coastal areas, primarily in the Caspian Sea area. There was also a discussion in terms of what do we know now in terms of biodiversity underwater. Do we know now the situation in terms of the population? Has it increased or decreased compared to pre-COVID situation? That at the moment is something that's unknown, possibly because of the closures and restrictions, the inability of the different organizations to actually conduct such assessment. Also, one of the things that's very that came out from the discussion is that other than the impacts on social and livelihood, socioeconomic impacts, the other things that the members of the group talked about are the interlinkages of SDG 14 to other SDGs as well, because there was a mention of like the impact of drought and how it can affect life underwater. And there was also reports on the increased demand for clean water in some parts of the sub-region. However, although there's a demand, the access is very difficult, and it's all linked as well to how it will later on impact life underwater. So basically, these are the different ways that COVID-19 has affected or impacted the life underwater, or we call SDG 14 within Central Asia. So based on these impacts, the group actually tried to assess. The first question to the group was, what do you think are the actions or measures that have been taken? And we rephrased this to the question of, what actions or measures do you think should be taken to address the COVID-19 impacts earlier on identified on life underwater or below water, and the activities within these different water resources? And some of the few things recommended is to conduct stock taking exercise, possibly more research on biodiversity below water within the subregion. It is because not much is known, and there's already very limited resources in terms of life underwater within the subregion. So there's a need for more stock taking and research. The other concern is that there should be the response in terms of providing social protection and support for economic consumption should continue, because if this stops, this might have ramifications on the way people actually do their activities within the water area, which in turn could affect the limited resources available in terms of life below water. There was also a discussion on possible reassessment of SDG achievement within the subregion. Right now, there is this view that most of the SDGs within the different countries are focused on trying to assess the needs of the people. Although the needs of natural resources, for example, such as SDG 14 might not be given such focus and attention. So there's a need for such assessment. That's been a recommendation. And also exploring financing options to help attain the different SDGs, particularly SDG 14. We have what we call in the UN leaving no one behind. So hopefully, by exploring financing options, we will not be leaving any of the SDGs behind and just focus on a few. So I'll stop right there, but I'll give a few of my reflections based on our discussions. First, I think it is important to underscore that we cannot tackle SDGs in isolation. And SDG 14 is a good example because, as you can see based on our discussion, we found the interdependencies with SDG 14, SDG 13, which is climate change, SDG 6 on water and sanitation, and SDG 7, which is on energy. So I think that's one good reflection from my side, and that it is also important to manage the interface between life on land and life on water. As you would note based on the discussion of the group, it's hard to actually separate them based on their reflection on when they think of impacts of life below water. It's hard to separate it from what's happening above it. So I think those are some of my reflections in terms of our discussion. And once again, I thank all the participants in our group, and thank you again to ESCAP and to all the co-organizers for this forum and for the opportunity to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you again for the summary and reflections. Now I would like to ask Ms. Aina Saidleva of UNFPA Turkmenistan to give a brief her reflections on SDG 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. It's my pleasure to report back on the key highlights discussed at the breakout group on SDG 5, which is on gender equality. Country representatives from different organizations responded to a challenging question, and one of them was whether the pandemic derails the progress on gender equality in the North and Central Asian sub-region, by acknowledging that full implementation of 2030 development agenda is not possible without accelerating progress toward SDG Goal 5. As such, country representatives highlighted the importance of a whole of society approach by applying gender responsive lenses to move out of the crisis and achieve sustainable development. We agreed that COVID-19 pandemic is not just a health issue, and it is a profound shock to all our societies and economies, which continues to exacerbate existing inequalities for women and girls across all spheres, from health to the economy and security, social protection, and as was mentioned by previous speaker, very much interrelates with all other SDGs. The response to the pandemic must include support for vulnerable groups, including for women and girls who were already at risk due to pre-existing inequalities, and that was one of the points of the discussion. And this group who already had these pre-existing inequalities, they're disproportionately affected as the pandemic further hits from the gender and other forms of inequality in the society. So this SDG framework offers the governments of the North and Central Asia sub-region holistic framework to turn commitments into concrete actions and track social norms change when it comes to gender equality, and all 9 targets on the SDG 5 and other respective SDGs discussed today address many of the sub-region's challenges brought by the global pandemic. So we briefly discussed a few other SDGs, and it was attention on SDG 1 on poverty, that we shall recognize the need for special support for women by governments in the face of the impacts of the pandemic, and especially when it comes to unpaid care work, especially who lacks the access to decent work and associated benefits such as health insurance and unemployment benefits. We discussed the effect, negative effect on small businesses and women entrepreneurship in general, because this is where women tend to be represented more. And we had very interesting example from Azerbaijan by colleagues sharing that Azerbaijan approved the rules for state guarantees and subsidizing interest on loans to entrepreneurs. And according to the rules, guarantees and subsidies issued to entrepreneurs operating during the pandemic. We briefly discussed the SDG 3 on health, that national health care system capacity, unfortunately, is very much impacted, and women's access to quality health services, including reproductive health services, may be disrupted as the resources are diverted. We also had a discussion on SDG 4 because of all the measures that the government and countries in the sub-region introduced because of the spread of COVID at the initial stage. And closures of educational institutions have kept children youth out of schools at different levels. And many girls from disadvantaged households, unfortunately, cannot participate in remote learning options offered by the countries. And this prompts more inequalities in access to remote learning. We had a brilliant experience from Ministry of Education from Kyrgyz Republic, which actually had a review, sort of anti-discrimination and gender-sensitive review of all educational materials in Kyrgyzstan. We discussed SDG 5, we're focusing on gender-based violence, that because of the pandemic, home is no longer a safe space to many women, and emerging data suggest that it become that there is a steep increase actually of violence facing by women and girls. And we talked that there is a need to allocate additional resources and introduce supportive services and mechanisms to women and girls. And we had interesting examples from Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan, which shared their experiences with hotline services for women and girls facing the disability. And we also briefly discussed SDG 17, that in order to establish accurate picture of the outbreak and its effects, we need actually access to disaggregated data by sex and age, location, alongside the data on socioeconomic gender inequalities and discrimination in the societies. So actually that was the very rough summary, and thank you to all country representatives who shared the examples. Over, Juliet. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the summary and for hosting the discussion. I would like to invite Mr. Rovshan Nuramanhadov from UNFPA Turkmenistan to explain what happened in SDG 15 in a very brief summary. I'm afraid we're running up against time. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliet. Yes, I had the pleasure to moderate the breakout session discussions on SDG 15, and I thank my colleague Bishwa Tiwari for co-moderating the discussions on the session. We were discussing SDG 15, Life on Land, which is mainly about protection of biological diversity, flora and fauna, ecosystems, including natural, urban, and rural landscapes. And the discussions actually started from outlining the positive impact that the COVID-19 has made, let's say, on our nature, especially improvements in air quality have been observed. It's mainly because of, you know, the COVID pandemic restrictions and lockdowns, because of, you know, less travel, less use of planes and vehicles, and that was the positive outcome from these restrictions. However, in terms of response and recovery measures to address the impact of COVID-19, it was noted that more focus the governments have undertaken towards the social sectors, such as education and health, and less attention was placed to address environmental matters. Now coming back to concerns and issues, it was separately noted that in big cities, the cutting trees remains a big problem, especially in the construction segments. And as we know that in urban settlements, construction is one of the dynamic sectors. An example was given that one construction company had to cut a lot of trees and drained actually a natural lake to free up more land for construction. In response to this type of concerns, most of the governments have adopted special decrees to protect plants and trees. For example, Turkmenistan, despite the pandemic restrictions and pandemic impact, continues its regular nationwide tree planting campaigns, in which every year the government facilitates the initiative of planting several million trees across the country. Armenia has adopted an afforestation program, which also mitigates the impact of the pandemic on the ecosystem's quality. Kazakhstan persistently promotes industrial development with the use of energy efficient technologies and practices, with less, of course, burden on use of natural resources. It was also noted in the discussion that in combination with the impact of the global pandemic impact, especially in the region of Central Asia, drought and water deficiency remains a severe concern as a result of the climate change impact. And that particularly affects the issue of combating desertifications in the relevant countries. Now, turning to recommendations that the group has highlighted for the countries to consider. One of the recommendations is to introduce qualitative parameters into the assessment of the work of, let's say, urban or regional governance, because now their work is mainly assessed against quantitative parameters in terms of the sizes and production volumes and things like that. So it was suggested that SDGs parameters should be integrated into assessing or into reinforcing the quality assurance against the work of the relevant senior officials. It was also noted that the governments should be paying more attention to strengthening the work of the protected area systems. And to that extent, a good example was given from Kazakhstan, where the country has successfully implemented a project on protecting saiga, which is a fauna species, through banning the hunting in the springtime. And likewise, it is highly recommended that the country integrates specific, COVID pandemic mitigation measures into the work of affected protected areas, systems, and networks. It was also recommended that more attention should be given to encouraging investment applications or investments to promote more effective, green electric transport and the use of other practices, green technologies that, of course, will have minimum impact on the quality on life on land and ecosystems and biological diversity. So I think with this, I have covered the main findings of our discussions. I would like to ask my colleagues from the group if they want to add anything if I missed, but I hope I did not. So many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for the summary. And as you can see, thank you again to all the moderators and the hosts, and especially those who enlivened the discussion with your examples and insights. We also posted a link in the chat for the evaluation. So we really would like to hear from you about the session and use your feedback to improve future sessions. So please do take some time. It will only take a few minutes of your time to evaluate this session. And in the nature of time, I would like to thank everyone very much for your participation. We've seen these expert insights, discussions, and examples from countries in the subregion to highlight that there's a need for ecosystem conservation and rebuilding our relationships with nature for the recovery, and an importance for building human capabilities for the recovery in education and gender equality, and that all of these SDGs are interconnected. And this pandemic provides an opportunity to improve systems and an opportunity for transformation. Now that everything is disrupted, we can rebuild and reimagine and innovate together. So thank you all very much for your participation. And I hope you can join the following sessions. I'll hand over to my colleague Natalia to tell you more about them.
Thank you so much, Juliet. So participants, please, you see the link for the evaluations is in the chat. Now we'll just wait for 2 minutes and give you the opportunity to fill it out. It's really, really fast. It's just yes, no, did you like it? And then we will have a few minutes break before we move into session 3. So we'll just be quiet for 2 minutes and then we'll say more. Thank you. Please fill out the evaluation. The links are in the chat. So thank you very much for filling out the questionnaire. Juliet, I think we want to try and see if we can have a screenshot of as many participants as would like to, right? So
Yes.
Can switch on. Okay, go ahead, Juliet.
Please go ahead. Those of you who would like to, we'd love to see your lovely faces and try to capture, since we can't be together in person, try to capture those who've been here with us in this session quickly before we move into the next session. So if you can turn on your cameras if you'd like, and we'll take some screenshots of those of you who are here. All right, keep smiling. Our colleagues taking them page by page. Great, thank you all very much. And you're free to leave them on if you'd like for the next session. Thank you again.
Okay. Thank you so much, Juliet. Thank you so much, colleagues. This was an absolutely wonderful session. Not always easy to moderate, I noticed, because sometimes I thought people that had no reason to be shy just to stay silent, but still, I think we had a very nice, how do you say, impression of what the main challenges are in the region. We will now take a 3-minute break. So please, everybody, go grab a coffee, do what you need to do, and then come back. We'll start session 3, 5 minutes past the half hour, so 35. So please come back in about 3 minutes. Thank you.